On today's show, we're going between what's the difference between last year's and this year's World Series, and why, if you don't love baseball at its Rangers Diamondbacks, you don't deserve it at its Yankees Dodgers. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, before we get into the differences between last year's and this year's World Series, why everyone is still mad about this matchup and last year's matchup, it might just want to be mad about everything, and the bigged way Major League Baseball is dropping the ball in promoting its own sport. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Now, before we get into the differences between this and last year's World Series, I thought you all might like to remember what happened on this year ago today. Game 6 of the ALCS. Rangers win 9-2 in the most emotionally dead game I think I've ever been emotionally dead I've ever been while watching a Rangers game. Just a couple of days after the Rangers had their hearts ripped out in Game 5 with that 3-run go-ahead game-winning homer by stinking Jose Altuve. They come back on Sunday with a masterful performance by Nathan Eovaldi, a low-key incredible game from Mitch Garver, who went 3 for 4 in that game, with the game-tying home run to the opposite field with Jonah Heim's incredible home run to the opposite field that Kyle Tucker nearly robbed, probably should have robbed. I mean, that was, I think, one of the 18 different incredible moments from that game. I mean, we all know how many home runs we've seen Kyle Tucker rob of the Rangers in right field over the years in Houston with that shorter wall. He is such a good defender, and he makes that play time and time and time again, and he didn't that one time, and it ended up being the difference in the game. It was a masterful shot by Heim, and then he did end up robbing a garbage time near home run by Travis Jankowski. Just nice little moment there for Janko, not to mention the grand slam by Adolis Garcia. And what was really the moment of that game was Jose Leclerc coming in and striking out John Singleton with the bases loaded. Still a very, very close game at that point, thankfully, with the RBI hit by pitch from Corey Seager and the grand slam from Adolis Garcia after getting booed mercilessly for getting hit by a pitch by that punk Brian Abreu. Strikes out 4 times, gets booed, and then hits an absolutely majestic grand slam after swinging for the fences all day long. What a glorious, glorious game that was, and a glorious World Series. And I think this year's World Series will also be pretty darn fun. There's a lot of hype from the casuals, from the big annoying fan base in New York and across the world, and the big annoying fan base in Los Angeles and across the world. But when I look at the differences between this year's and last year's World Series, there's this tweet. I can't remember exactly who tweeted out. Probably a million people that were all tweeting out the exact same joke of, if you don't love me at my Rangers Diamondbacks World Series, then you don't deserve me at my Yankees Dodgers World Series. And, you know, at first it might seem like an insult to the Rangers with me agreeing with that, but it's not as much of a slight on the Rangers as it is if you don't love baseball, if you don't love both of these World Series. I mean, these are 2 drastically different World Series matchups. I mean, we have the haves and the have-nots, the underdogs and the uber dogs, or top dogs, if you will, and the big money spending versus the occasionally big money spending from the two teams in last year's World Series. But I feel like the star power is where we have to start, of where these two teams, where these two matchups are so vastly different. And not just the stars of who's playing well right now, because I mean, both teams last year obviously had, incredibly hot players, incredibly good players that were playing out of their minds to get them to a World Series, to get them past teams with vastly superior resources that were, thought to be vastly better. The Diamondbacks, punching in the mouth everybody who they faced off against, including the Dodgers that won 111 billion games that year, including the Philadelphia Phillies, who were thought to be the favorites. I thought, oh, once they got past the Braves, there's no way this little D-backs team, the little engine that could, is going to trip them up, especially when they just had to win one game at home. The Diamondbacks said, nope, you're not doing that. We're going to the World Series. Or the Rangers, who stumbled their way into October, having to catch that cross-country flight all the way from Seattle, losing the division title on the last day to those stinking Houston Astros, going to Tampa Bay, no one thinking the Rangers could do anything, and then they go and win 11 straight road games in the postseason. No one has ever done that. No one before. No one will probably ever do that again. Just an incredible run by the Rangers. But in terms of just stars in total, just the vastness of their career, of how good these players have been, how many no doubt Hall of Famers each matchup had. Well, last year, in terms of no doubt Hall of Famers, even on the roster, you maybe go one. I'd say as many as three. I mean, Evan Longoria was on the Diamondbacks roster, definitely by no means at his peak. I feel pretty confident in saying he is going to be a Hall of Famer for sure. The only guy you can say without a doubt is going to be a Hall of Famer in last year's World Series at the time, before heading into it, was Max Scherzer. There was literally never any doubt about his Hall of Fame candidacy. He clearly wasn't at his best. If he was, then the Rangers would have started him in game one of that World Series and game one of every postseason game that they played, but they didn't. He gave them 3 shutout innings and left with an injury in that World Series, and that was that. And then you have Corey Seager, who I feel pretty confident in saying now is going to be a surefire Hall of Famer. You have 2 World Series MVPs. There's not a whole lot of players that have done that. He is going to eventually get to that career mark of around 50, 60 WAR in his career. I feel very confident in saying that. He's got 4 Silver Sluggers. He's got 200 home runs as a shortstop. He has been one of the better players in baseball for quite some time. And if not for Shohei Ohtani, he would have a regular season MVP to go along with his 2 World Series MVPs last year. But alas, that's not how it works. And this year, when you look at surefire, no doubt Hall of Famers on the roster, you got 4 on each team. Now, granted, one of those isn't going to be playing. Actually, maybe 2 of those won't be playing in the series, depending on Freddie Freeman's health with that ankle injury. But each team, the Yankees and the Dodgers, both have more surefire, no doubt Hall of Famers on their roster than the matchup had combined last year. You have Judge, Soto, Stanton, Cole, all those guys in my mind are surefire, no doubt Hall of Famers. And then on the Dodgers, you have Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Shohei Ohtani, Clayton Kershaw. All those guys are surefire, no doubt Hall of Famers. Absolutely. And a lot of them are at their peak. You also have, Aaron Judge, who is almost certainly going to win the MVP this year, versus Shohei Ohtani, who is also almost certainly going to win the MVP this year, which is incredible. You also have the reigning AL Cy Young winner in Garrett Cole, who's almost assuredly going to start game 1 for the Yankees, and versus maybe the Dodgers go bullpen game 1. But just the star power, the casual, not ball knower appeal that this World Series matchup has is different for sure. It's every once in a while, I think you do need this kind of a World Series matchup versus last year that, to the locked in fan, or maybe the locked on fan, ball, you would be saying, oh, last year's World Series also had quite a bit of star power, also had quite a few incredible players playing out of their freaking minds. But coming up, we look at what those differences are and why it's so important for the sport to celebrate both types of World Series matchups, and how MLB is dropping the ball. All that and more right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the best place to get tickets for all the different sporting events you're wanting to go to, whether it's Mavs season, which starts up on Thursday, whether you want to go catch a Stars game, whether you're wanting to catch a Cowboys game, college football game, or you're not wanting to go to a sports game at all because it's the baseball off season, so your sports season is done. Whether you want to go to a comedy show, whether you wanted to go to a concert, whether you wanted to go to theater, it doesn't matter what it is. Gametime is the best place and the easiest place to get all the last minute tickets you want. They've also got all-in pricing, so this feature shows you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. They've also got the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% the difference. You can also get a panoramic view of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what it's going to look like when you get there. So just download the Gametime app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. A shout out to the everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, I will have former Rangers pitcher Tony Barnett on to talk about his career, his time in Japan, how that made him transition to Major League Baseball, and just whatever else we get into. So be sure to tune into that tomorrow. Now, let's look at more differences between this year's and last year's World Series. Last year, we had two teams that had a combined one World Series championship. The Diamondbacks won back in 2001 and have not won it since then. The Rangers had never won a championship. They had only been to the World Series twice, lost both times, one time incredibly heartbreakingly. And these two teams this year, well, they have a few titles between them. You may have met a Yankees fan, and if you ever have, I guarantee you they have told you something to the effect of 27 rings. Now, it's not been quite as many as of late. They only have 2 this millennium, and they only have 17 since integration, which feels like it was an entirely different sport. Before then, integration was back in the 45, maybe 55. But either way, the Yankees have not won a whole lot as of late. They have in the regular season, but not really in the postseason. And the Dodgers, they have 6 World Series titles since they moved to LA. Now, granted, they only have one of those titles since the 1980s, and it was during a COVID-shortened season, and they did win it in the Rangers Stadium, but they still have been a juggernaut for the last few seasons, whereas the Rangers went from 4th to 1st, not 4th to 2nd, technically, then to 1st in the postseason. But they went from being absolutely terrible to amazing right after. Same with the Diamondbacks, another team that lost 90-plus games the season before and ended up making the World Series. We haven't seen something like that in quite some time. And despite the narratives that we pushed about how, this was so incredible of the Yankees to have this incredible comeback going from still a winning season to an even more winning season. The Yankees, who haven't had a losing season since 2 years before I was born, 1992. I'm 30 years old. It's been a long time since the Yankees have had even a losing season, let alone a 100-loss season like the Rangers had just a few years before they ended up winning the World Series. But for me, it's just the difference between the celebration of what is being done on both these teams that bothers me. How it's being framed differently when basically the exact same things are happening, whether it's happening for the Rangers or the Diamondbacks, or it's happening for the Yankees or Dodgers. The timeline is not that different, but the way it's framed often is spun very differently. I mean, when the Yankees and Mets and Dodgers spin big, it's amazing for the sport. But when the Rangers went out and signed, Simeon and Seager and also John Gray that offseason after losing 100 games, the Rangers were clowned nationally. They thought, why is this team trying? Why is this team spending big? That's so dumb. I can't believe you would give Corey Seager 10 years and $325 million. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, I can't believe that you'd give Marcus Semien, a guy who just finished third in MVP voting, had the season of his life, actually heading into free agency, had finished top 3 in MVP voting 2 of the last 3 years. Oh, why would you give this guy a 7-year, $175 million deal? Oh, you're absolutely crazy for that. When the Yankees and Dodgers, the Mets do it, it's somehow good for the sport. Don't really understand the difference there. When Jose Leclerc and Josh Boers go nuclear for a month and go absolutely insane for a month, it's fluky and random and not that impressive. But when Luke Weaver does it for a month for the Yankees, it's incredible. It's sustainable. It's, oh, he's the greatest closer that we've ever seen. Blah, 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 blah. The exact same thing happening. 2 different teams viewed somehow entirely differently. When the Yankees go from losing 80 games, still had a winning record, to winning 95 games or 94 games, however many it was this year, 94 games, maybe, correct. It's incredible. But the Rangers go from 95 losses to 90 wins and winning a World Series. It's not quite as impressive, or it's viewed or framed as a similar level of comeback. Whereas you look 1 year back for the Yankees, 1 year back before that, they won 99 games. This is not a team that has lost much. This is not a team that has overcome something. This is not a team that has rebuilt. It was just figuring some things out. It's slightly different. I mean, they had Austin Wells this year. They had a lot more from Carlos Rodon. They had a lot more from other random pitchers on their staff. They had a healthier Aaron Judge and a healthier Giancarlo Stanton, but they didn't rebuild. They didn't retool. They didn't, completely turn around the course of the franchise. They weren't by any means in a hopeless position. They're still in a kind of weird position, a little confusing. I didn't really think that they would do this year. I didn't think they'd be bad, but I didn't think they'd do, 94 wins and make it all the way to the World Series. But they did, and it's a credit to them. But it wasn't quite as impressive, wasn't nearly as impressive a turnaround as the Rangers, who went from, at the trade deadline in 2021, how dead this team was, how bleak the future looked heading into that offseason, where eventually they would sign their franchise building blocks in Seager and Semien. They would the next year bring in Bruce Bochy and Jacob deGrom and Nathan Eovaldi and start to turn things around with Chris Young at the helm. But it wasn't anywhere near. The Yankees turnaround was impressive, but not anywhere near the franchise altering, from dead in the water, no farm system to speak of whatsoever, to World Series champion 2 years later. It was one of the most impressive turnarounds I think we've ever seen, especially if the Rangers can bounce back and start being contenders yet again for years and years to come, hopefully in 2025, whereas this year they ended up missing out on the postseason entirely. It's just not anywhere near it. And the one that bothers me the most, that still sticks in my craw to this day, when the Yankees sign an injury-prone starting pitcher for probably a little bit more money than I thought he would make, or maybe he's worth, in Carlos Rodon, for $160 million. It's brilliant. It's, oh my gosh, what a risk, but it totally worked out. And they're so smart for doing it. And oh my gosh, they totally predicted that he would have 32 starts in 175 innings in 2024 after, 14 starts and being absolutely terrible in his first year in New York. A 6.85 ERA last year in those 14 starts, not even, maybe averaging around 5 innings per start. Still not good in the innings that he pitched last year. Honestly, solid season this year. Had some moments in the postseason, including an incredible start in the ALCS with, I think it was 20-something whiffs, just an incredible start against Cleveland. And this year, a near 4 ERA in 32 starts, was healthy, was honestly the healthiest season of his career, basically. But he had much less of a track record of health shown than when the Rangers go and sign Jacob deGrom for 5 years and $185 million, but like $19 million more guaranteed than Carlos Rodon. It's, disaster. Stupid. How dare they? How dare they think that they can do this? What a dumb move. I can't believe they thought they could, keep Jacob deGrom healthy. And they haven't. He's gotten 9 starts in 2 seasons and 41 innings. It's not what the Rangers paid for. But the track record of durability with Jacob deGrom is so much better than Carlos Rodon. Rodon has still never pitched 180 innings in a season. And deGrom did that in 2015 and 2017 and 2018 and 2019. Heck, he had been one of the most durable pitchers in baseball from 2014 when he came up to 2020, the COVID-shortened season. Now, injuries ravaged him in 2021 and 22, and unfortunately in 2023 and 2024 again. But at his peak, he was so much better than Rodon. It was so much more worth the risk. He is a 2-time Cy Young winner, could have won it as many as 3 times. That 2020 season really was up in the air between 3 pitchers. And I think that a little bit of voting fatigue got to them that year of him, the reason that he didn't win that 3rd straight Cy Young award. But the Rangers were framed as idiots and morons just because of revisionist history. Yeah, it worked out a little bit less well to this point for the Rangers, but they also won the freaking World Series in 2023. So therefore should have been a moot point, but the Rangers still being conned on for signing Jacob deGrom. And it was even less risky and more worth the risk than signing Carlos Rodon. But because it was the Yankees doing it and not the Rangers, it was viewed as some kind of moral victory or whatever it was. Still pisses me off to this day. Coming up, we're talking about how the Major League Baseball is dropping the ball in the biggest way, more so than just what it's doing on social media in terms of marketing the game, and a little bit more right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with a $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Now, if you want to bet on this World Series right now, the Dodgers favorites at -122, Yankees favorites at +104, whether you're wanting to predict who is going to win the World Series MVP, whether it's Shohei Ohtani, who's the favorite now at +220, or Aaron Judge, the second favorite at +500, Juan Soto, the third favorite at +550. You can check out all the odds for that and the NBA season and the NHL season and NFL. So go visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Now, I don't want to get this skewed the wrong way. This is a good matchup for Major League Baseball. This is good for the sport. This is going to be fun. I am genuinely excited for this World Series, although I am just very slightly rooting for the Yankees, mainly because I like Jose Trevino and I want him to have fun. I want him to get the World Series celebration since he couldn't be on the Rangers for theirs. I genuinely wish him well in all of life and baseball success. But these are 2 titans, 2 hated teams, 2 teams that the average fan just loves to despise. But there are so many legitimately generational, all-time great players in this matchup that is going to make it a lot of fun. Now, I think it'd be a lot more fun if some of the Dodgers pitchers were healthier, if we're not going to have to see a bullpen game in probably a third of these matchups, probably at least 2 games, we're going to see the Dodgers go to a bullpen game. It will be more fun to watch Tyler Glasnow pitch in the postseason. Remember how good he looked against the Rangers in that wild card game with the Rays last year? Doing that in a World Series against this Yankees lineup would be very fun. Aaron Judge, one of the greatest hitters we've ever seen. He's incredible. Very fun to watch. Kind of a boring guy because he's a Yankees captain. That's kind of how they make him. But still, incredibly good at baseball. Juan Soto, incredibly good at baseball. Mookie Betts, incredibly good at baseball. Shohei Ohtani, legendary, generational, all-time, probably the best baseball player we have ever seen or will ever see. And that's going to be really fun to watch in the postseason. It already has been, but in the World Series where, more casuals are being brought in, this is good for the sport. What's also good for the sport is new teams winning the World Series, new fan bases getting to hop on their bandwagon, getting these casual fans in these big markets like Dallas, Fort Worth, like the entire state of Texas. Heck, the Rangers broadcast in 5 different states. They are blacked out in 5 different states. This is one of the biggest media markets. Heck, I'd venture to say it's the 3rd biggest media market behind New York and LA. This is not some Midwest team. This is not, Delaware, the Delaware Rangers. This is not Kansas City or Pittsburgh. No offense to the Pirates or the Royals. This is a big market. And Major League Baseball is dropping the ball in a huge, huge way, and has been since the Rangers won the World Series. This is more important than how many exclamation marks MLB tweets when they're showing a Shohei Ohtani home run. It's more important than how many times you can see Aaron Judge's face in marketing material for Major League Baseball. It's more important than all of that. And it's the World Series DVD. The Rangers had a documentary made about their World Series run, and it was just completely dropped off casually, nonchalantly, and then basically never seen again. The Rangers did show it on Bally Sports Southwest after the final post-game show of the 2024 season. I wasn't really ready to watch all of it, so I hopped back in about maybe 30 minutes into it, and by that point, the Rangers were already in the ALCS, and there weren't really that many interviews. It was just more of showing kind of highlights, a few little behind-the-scenes moments, not nearly as much in depth as a championship documentary should be. Now, the Dallas Mavericks 2011 NBA championship documentary, I've watched probably 1 million times, maybe 1,000,001. It's been a lot of times. The amount of times I would watch a Texas Rangers World Series documentary, probably about 1 million in the first week. And we have not heard any update on whether we are going to get to watch. I scoured 2 weeks worth of channel lineups for Bally Sports Southwest after the season was done, and they were not showing this World Series documentary again. Are you freaking kidding me? You just dump this halfway tried thing at the end of a miserable season. You show it one freaking time, and that's it? And you just don't speak about it again? The only update we got, according to Christopher Fitz at Apoplectic Fitz on Twitter, who has been very much on this since the end of the World Series and has been badgering everybody and emailing everybody, trying to figure out who can I give my money to watch this World Series documentary? I will buy so many of them. I will watch it so many times. Please give me this opportunity to give you more money to watch something about your sport, Major League Baseball, and they haven't. This was the update from Fitz yesterday. He said, if you're curious about the state of the Rangers' 2023 World Series documentary, the one MLB seems to have completely abandoned. Chuck Morgan mentioned that they haven't heard anything from Major League Baseball about releasing it as of October 4th, and this is the same information as they'd heard in August. Totally cool. Totally awesome. And yet, yesterday, Apple TV has the audacity to tweet out, it's the kind of matchup that deserves its own documentary. The Dodgers and Yankees will face off in the 2024 World Series and will be on the ground capturing it all. Coming soon to Apple TV. This World Series hasn't even started yet. Already has a guaranteed at least one more documentary than whatever Major League Baseball is doing. Major League Baseball had produced World Series documentaries for, I believe, since the 1980s, all the way up until 2022, where in 2023, they just decided, we're not doing it. We're deciding that this one championship, this franchise who has never won it all, this long tortured fan base that would desperately hold on to this World Series documentary for years and years and decades and centuries, assuming we live that long. We're not going to do it. That's the year. Of course. It's so insane that they cannot promote this generational championship, this incredible run, this historic, unbelievable, incredibly wacky, wild, behind-the-scenes moments of a team that was so boring and so candid for so long, and then once it turned to the postseason, these guys became creed-loving, hot dog-eating fat guys, self-proclaimed. Thank you, Mitch Garver, for an all-time quote. You can't just be bothered to produce a World Series documentary. Why? Why do you even exist? Why do you have a marketing department if you're not going to do this? This is so much bigger than whatever they're tweeting about, whatever they're promoting, whatever other ways that they have failed to promote this game. I mean, there have been so many criticisms, I think some very valid and some deeply unfair, of how MLB fails to market its games. I think that it doesn't do a great job of, promoting the stars. Some people think they promote the stars too much. I think they need to promote more stars on more different teams, because there are so many guys that are incredibly good at baseball that don't get the love and appreciation that I think they deserve. Corey Seager, because he's a boring baseball robot, happens to be one of them. But Aaron Judge is also a boring baseball robot, and he still gets promoted. And Shohei Ohtani is also a boring baseball robot of a personality that we've seen for the most part. I think there's a little bit more there. I think there's a little bit more for Corey Seager and Marcus Semien as well. Semien is a guy who has finished top 3 in MVP voting 3 times in his career. He is one of the most consistent players we have seen. Seager is an absolute baseball mashing robot genius in the postseason. I mean, he had an incredible postseason run, and so did Adolis Garcia. I mean, all this talk about how, oh my gosh, it's going to be so much fun to watch Aaron Judge and Juan Soto because they're so amazing in the postseason. Adolis Garcia had one of the best postseason runs we've ever seen. One of the best postseason series we've ever seen against Houston. I mean, basically, not quite, but almost single-handedly saving the Rangers in that ALCS. I mean, Semien didn't hit very well in that ALCS. Seager really didn't hit very well in that ALCS either. Carter was fine. Garver had quite a few moments. Heim had some moments. Lowe had some moments. Young had some moments as well. But really, it was Adolis Garcia who was probably the most easy choice for an ALCS MVP as we've ever seen. I mean, he hit 323 in the entire postseason with 8 home runs, set the record for most RBIs in a single postseason series. And he did that in game 1 of the World Series. We only played 2 more games in that postseason and then missed the rest of the World Series. He didn't have a hit in games 2 or 3 that he played in the World Series. He did that in game 1. He had already had that kind of an incredible postseason run. And Seager, winning his second World Series MVP, having a 694 slugging percentage in the postseason, having 6 home runs in the postseason, and really only having 1 in those first 2 rounds. I mean, this guy is an incredible baseball mashing genius, one of the best hitters in the sport right now, and is very underrated because the Rangers were kind of bad this year, but they were incredible last year. It was an incredible World Series run. And it is so frustrating to watch people who have no vested interest in the actual ratings of Major League Baseball who are going to be like, oh, see, because there's more people in New York and LA, that means that this World Series is objectively better than last year's. But at the end of the day, even though it's frustrating, it doesn't really matter. It matters a little bit, but probably not worthy of me ranting an entire episode, because the Rangers did win that World Series. It did count, whether it was fluky, whether it was stupid, whether it was ugly, whether nobody watched but me or you. It doesn't freaking matter, because the Texas Rangers, even if they never do it again, even if they fold the franchise tomorrow, no one will ever be able to take away that 2023 World Series championship, even if there's no freaking documentary to talk about it. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.